Well, we still have people that are filtering in, but I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar discussion, Technical Controls and Requirements for Organizations. Today we're going to be covering and discussing CMMC coverage with accompanying solutions and how these solutions help augment compliance with CMMC at the various levels of certification. We're going to spend about 30 minutes with our speakers on this topic, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. Today's speakers are Robert E. Johnson III and Kyle Dimmitt. Robert E. Johnson III is the president, CEO, and co-founder of Cimcor. Mr. Johnson's led the development of multiple commercial software packages and several patented and pending technologies. Cimcor develops innovative next-generation file integrity monitoring software. The Cimtrack Integrity Suite monitors and protects a wide range of physical, network, cloud, and virtual IT assets in real time, while providing detailed forensic information about all changes. Kyle Dimmitt's career in information security and compliance has included roles within internal IT audit for both national and global companies, as well as IT assurance and consulting with the public accounting firm Ernst & Young. Currently, Kyle works for LogRhythm as Principal Compliance Research Engineer. In this role, he researches the newest global compliance mandates and frameworks and consults with their product team to create easy-to-use compliance solutions for LogRhythm customers. So welcome to both Kyle and Robert.
Oh, thanks, Jackie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and let you confirm that you can see everything okay.
Wonderful. Yeah, really how this is going to go today, it's really great that we have two speakers today. Kyle's going to go ahead and get us started, and then Robert's going to finish up the presentation. The speakers will talk for roughly 30 minutes and combined, and we'll open it up to Q&A, similar to how we've done for our previous webinars. So we're really looking forward to this. And for those of you that we've already had a couple questions come in, please feel free to put your questions in chat. We are going to answer as many as we can. We'd hate for you to wait until the end, so please feel free to put your questions in as you think of them. And as far as the two most common questions, is this being recorded and will this be available? Yes, this webinar will be available as of tomorrow, along with a copy of the slides that are in the webinar today. So we will be sending that to you as well. And with that, I will let you get started, Kyle.
Excellent. Are you seeing my screen okay? Do we have my slides up?
I see them fine, yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Jackie. And thank you for the reading of my bio. I'll go ahead and skip on that part, giving myself an introduction. But and thanks everyone for joining us today. I've really enjoyed giving talks on CMMC recently, just because it's such a hot topic for everyone in the defense industrial base, and actually even those that are sort of around the peripheral, that are sort of looking in, seeing, is it going to impact my business? Especially when you continue to see more and more public incidents and breaches like SolarWinds and the Colonial Pipeline breach, etc. So we'll go ahead and get into the content today. If you, as Jackie said, if you attended earlier sessions, or if you've been interested in this topic at all, you've probably have an understanding of sort of what makes up CMMC. But I do like to recap, just to sort of level set before we talk about specific controls and just give everyone on the same page. So the CMMC targets defense industrial base contractors that are handling federal contract information and controlled unclassified information. And the goal of CMMC is to really make sure that the contractors handling that information are meeting that minimum standard of cybersecurity that would prevent release of that information that would not be classified, but still of interest to attackers. So CUI actually stems from an executive order signed by Barack Obama back in 2010, which created 10 categories for non-classified information that needed control and protection due to the vulnerabilities and security risks associated with it. So obviously the DoD has taken that concern very seriously, and in the spirit of sort of further securing the defense industrial base, introduced CMMC, wanting to issue that single unified sort of cybersecurity standard so that all future acquisitions would be in a similar format, and you wouldn't see variation between sort of sub-agencies and programs. So, now that we've sort of recapped the drivers for CMMC, I want to just take a quick look and review of the framework itself. Now, the CMMC is built upon already established NIST special publications and DFAR regulations. There are a few additional influencers there, such as the UK Cyber Essentials. I think the Australia Cybersecurity Center Essential 8 had some influence as well. So you actually do see some global impact in some of the makeup of what made the CMMC today. But as you can see here, we break down the primary domains and the processes that comprise CMMC. So the primary takeaway from that is that it's not just another set of controls, it is a maturity model. So when you look down at the breakdown beyond domain, you have control practices, which is what we're really going to be focusing on today, alongside processes or process maturity that is ultimately certified to. So like I said, while we're going to be focusing on the controls, more the technical perspective and where some of those tools can help you, there is a focus on process as well that entities need to keep in mind and consider. Now, this image on the bottom right, I like this graphic that the DoD has issued because it really lays it out in a very sort of comprehensive and short view. You know, the 17 domains on the left, all originating from FIPS 200 and 800-171 families. So they're very familiar control families. And on the right, you actually see the processes and practices in parallel. So for example, if you wanted to achieve level 3 certification, you would need to demonstrate that your processes were performed, documented, managed, and that you have controls or control practices that are included in the basic, intermediate, and good cyber hygiene. So like I said, we're going to be focusing more on the control practices today because we're focusing on technology and SIEM and FIM and how that sort of augments and supports that use case and not the processes around them. But I like to sort of go through this just to level set and make sure we know what we're talking about. All right, and because we're talking about controls today, I like using this graphic from the DoD as well, because it just kind of shows where the spread of those controls exist and where they were sourced from. You know, starting all the way at the bottom, the basic level 1, you actually only have 17 control practices that you need to demonstrate. And all of those are mapped back to either NIST or FAR. You know, going up, you see more from 800-171 and FAR, ultimately up to level 5 in the advanced or progressive mode, where you actually see all 171 control practices. That includes 171, FAR, and a lot of those global influencers as well. Another reason I wanted to show this is because a lot of people see this or they hear about CMMC and they tend to get scared, especially about level 5. You know, that's a very advanced, mature 171 control practices is a fair amount. The DoD has said that that's going to be a very, very small number of actual contracts that go out. And in addition, this chart is good because it shows the number of controls at each level, but it's pretty much understood that levels 2 and 4 aren't actually likely to see requirements in contracts, that they're more considered transition levels. So you're going to see most requirements coming in at 1, 3, and 5 in the contracts, the majority of which being at 1 and 3. All right, so now that we've talked about CMMC, I do like to cover a little bit about the federal compliance landscape, because some of it can start to blur and overlap. And obviously this list in front isn't exhaustive by any means, but they're important ones to consider when you talk about CMMC. So starting with FISMA on the left, established by Congress in 2002, ultimately gave them a sort of formal recognition or the Department of Homeland Security recognition to actually implement information security initiatives. And this standardization actually allowed them to use NIST guidance. So the NIST on the right, those standards for information security had been in development since, I believe, the 90s. And while they don't exclusively focus on information security standards, the 800 series, which does focus on computer security, has obviously matured. We've gone through a number of iterations of 5.3 and 171, and now they're even including things like zero trust security, privacy, and even cloud security. And the last one I want to talk about on here is actually FedRAMP, because it is a federal cloud certification that allows federal agencies wanting to utilize cloud services to shop from sort of a single place where everyone has achieved that FedRAMP authorization. So if a company doesn't want to recertify, for instance, for every agency they want to sell to, they get FedRAMP authorization and they're cleared at a certain FedRAMP level to sell to certain agencies. So there are similarities in sort of that streamlining effect, but the scope for FedRAMP is really limited to cloud services and cloud offerings, whereas CMMC is concerned with what we talked about at the beginning, that CUI and FCI, regardless of where it resides. So, that being said, there could be overlap in potentially scope there. So there is consideration going on right now of, will FedRAMP have any kind of reciprocity? Will there be some sort of either carve out or contingency if you have some FedRAMP? Nothing official has been announced yet, but it could be, given that there's some sort of overlap there. But the biggest difference in what has occurred in the federal landscape up to this point, and the difference in what CMMC is, this sort of broad requirement for independent attestation versus what used to be self-attestation, before, I mean, the NIST standards have been around for some time now, and they have been required for federal agencies, but it's always been on a self-reporting method. So having this independent requirement, or requirement for independent audit, is the biggest change here. So that obviously makes for a great transition, because we want to talk about how SIM can really actually help you demonstrate to your assessors, CMMC compliance. So I imagine many of you are already familiar with SIM as a concept, but similar to CMMC, I did just want to spend a couple minutes here sort of giving it a little bit of definition, because when you get to the marketplace, there's a lot of buzzwords that can obscure a little bit. But SIM stands for Security, Information, and Event Management. But really at its core, it's an aggregator of data. So it collects receipts of activity across your environment. And the technology, like I said, has been around a long time, but it has evolved from sort of what used to just be log management and combined with more of this security event management, sort of looking at more analytical correlations, incident response. So in that sense, now when we talk about it in relation with compliance, especially, it has sort of two critical functions. That alerting on predetermined criteria for sort of real-time triage and reporting on that data and events. So actually evidencing that. And I like to use this puzzle piece metaphor on the right to talk about SIM, just because it's a good metaphor. It's all this activity in your environment is ultimately a piece of sort of the image of what's going on. And SIM is sort of able to scan through all of those pieces, giving you sort of the insight into this piece fits, or this one doesn't, or perhaps it shouldn't be there. So it's a good way to think about an overall view into your environment. All right, so as I mentioned, those sort of two critical functions when we talk about SIM in compliance, I wanted to expand upon that a little bit here. So that first component being security analytics, it goes by a number of different names depending on the SIM product you're talking about in the market. At LogRhythm, we call that AI engine or AIE rules. So, but in simple terms, it's alerts that you can set up based on certain defined criteria. And that ultimately helps you identify sort of complex situations that you might want to investigate, or you might want to store for evidence later. So I have a screen capture here on the right of our AI engine builder, and sort of how you can design these analytics in a graphical and structured way. So, in this first one is an example of looking for a compromised reconnaissance, malware, suspicion, sort of a bit of a catch-all for some nefarious activity, but a graphical way to represent that I want to look for this event followed by potentially another event. And the beauty of that is you can sort of layer on, certain types of events you want to look for, connecting it with other specific events, or filtering criteria if you want to limit it to, specific log sources, depending on your scope, or identity lists, depending on the people that you're looking for. Now, the second main function of SIM we talked about is that reporting capability. Now, SIM has a lot of capability to deliver custom reports that you could develop yourself or run on sort of a predefined basis. And you can schedule those reports to run and distribute automatically. And the beauty is in that you don't have to, it's not a manual collection effort every time you need to be assessed, right? If your assessors come in, you can have these running on a recurring basis and actually provide them those reports and evidence that they may need. So we're going to actually cover some specific controls here shortly, but I want to talk about what SIM really offers as a whole to start. And this next part here, I want to talk about the importance of sort of configuring your environment. So as I mentioned in analytics, you can set up to monitor activity from as few or as many data sources as you want. And I reiterate that as a foundational concept, that if you want to use SIM in compliance, because that second bullet point, alert fatigue and noise, is probably one of the most common complaints in SOCs. It can become noise if it's not appropriately configured and set up. So I have at the top here, garbage in, garbage out. What I mean is that the SIM can be extremely powerful in helping you monitor this large amount of data in your environment simultaneously. But every environment's going to be different. Every audit's going to be scoped a little bit differently. So if you're tailoring your analytics and data input specifically, according to your environment, you're going to receive more value out of it. And this image below is actually one of the ways in which we do a lot of this filtering. So we do it through lists, and specifically with CMMC, we use our consolidated compliance framework. Here you see CCF, but we have pre-configured lists that are set up with these rules that align with the controls that we've actually mapped to. So if you populate these, given the scope of your environment, you're going to see that sort of tailoring in your environment panning out, and not just receiving alerts over something that may or may not matter. All right, so where does SIM support CMMC particularly well? As I've talked about SIM, and as you're probably aware, SIM is really an augmenting to your control and your compliance program. It is a detective control. It sees things in your environment that have happened. So any tool really is only going to be able to augment. There's always going to be people and processes involved in controls. But that doesn't discount SIM as how well it actually works. And I label these control families specifically because as a detective mechanism, even with the limitation of detection only, these really shine and can help you effectively manage that program. So access control, a focus on account management, system privileges, remote access, records of all that information is sort of critical, not just for your real-time monitoring and controls, but your ability to evidence that to assessors. And the other big one, obviously, configuration management, audit and accountability is, again, one of the biggest. Being able to store and sort of maintain that audit evidence is key in sort of demonstrating your compliance to your assessors. All right, so we've talked at a higher level at how SIM can really help you with compliance, but I did want to call out a few example controls and show you that the SIM concepts as a whole do apply at the individual control level. So not just at level 1, level 3, but I did want to do one at level 1, 3, and 5, just to show you that you're getting value from SIM regardless of what level you're trying to comply with. If you're a small-time business that is, bidding on defense contracts, but it's likely that you have limited CUI and FCI, you're only going to need level 1, SIM is still a useful tool. Maybe you have an exorbitant amount of CUI and FCI, and it's going to flow down to a number of your subs. A SIM tool can do a lot for you if you're collecting a lot in your environment. So starting here at level 1, one of the core controls in identification and authentication, 1.076, being able to identify information system users and processes acting on behalf of users or devices. This is a pretty simple control. And actually just in identifying and implementing a SIM is arguably enough to actually satisfy this. But if you look at it from what we talked about, the two sort of critical functions, the security analytics perspective, with various rules and alerts that we have pre-configured, you can actually alert on certain types of activity that you may want to report on or investigate. So, and additionally, there's the reporting investigation side. While this is arguably the better application because that monitor data can actually be reported on, or potentially you need a population for your assessor to test, or just evidence that you've actually collected this and that you're fulfilling the control by the mere observation and collection of this data. So either way, both of these have some level of support to this control. So the next example here at level 3 is an access control from the access control family. And this is actually 2 parts. So it requires you to prevent non-privileged users from executing privileged functions, which is typically achieved through sort of appropriately managing your permission setup, right? But the second portion is capturing the activity of those functions. And that's where SIM really shines in this instance as well. So with SIM, you can actually monitor those functional areas that are deemed privileged, as well as the groups and individuals that you designated as privileged. So from that security analytics perspective, again, you're seeing deviations in real time. You can address them on the investigation and reporting side. And similar to level one, you can run those report on those users and activities that are going to allow you to demonstrate to your assessors, look, I'm compliant. Look at this quarterly report I have scheduled to run every quarter that's showing that these things were executed by the appropriate people. So it makes that sort of ongoing analysis easier for you. All right. Now, in the first couple examples for SIM, the biggest assist was likely in the reporting or investigative method to prove out that the control was actually operating. But when you get to level 5, and I chose this incident response one, you start to see a lot more value in the security analytics side. It's a much more mature process. It's not a control that everyone has, but you start to see that value in the security analytics because you can actually customize your own rules and alerts. You have that pre-configured content, from our research team pushing out rules based on real incidents in real time. And then on the manual side of things, you can actually drill down on those alerts, taking a closer look at the events that caused the activity. Or if it was severe enough and it rise to the level of an incident, you can actually observe that traffic, shut it down, quarantine that activity. And at the end of the day, once you sort of triage those things, you can see still on the reports and investigations to actually evidence all of that work to your assessors. So, the main point out of this is there's a lot of flexibility in what SIM can do from a compliance perspective. We mentioned it best as a detective method, but compliance is more than just detecting things. So that's, in saying that, that's actually a great transition to Robert and Cimcor here, because there's really great value in SIM and that detection. But when you see how we've partnered with Cimcor and more from a FIM perspective, you can get the more reactive or preventative side on the control perspective. So I don't want to steal all of Robert's thunder here, so I'm going to cut myself off and let him take over and take you through Cimcor.
All right. Well, thank you, Kyle.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. We will jump into it. Everyone, you can see my screen properly?
Looks like we're seeing it on my end.
We sure can.
Perfect. Well, that was a great presentation, Kyle. I guess it's time for a pop quiz. What 2 technologies, based on what you've learned, can help you in some way gather the evidence for up to 78% of the CMMC level 5 requirements? Let's see, what could it be? Well, it's LogRhythm combined with our product Cimtrack. And Kyle kind of gave you the hint that that's where we're going here. So let's figure out, why is that? How can there be so much coverage when you combine 2 tools together? Well, the thing that LogRhythm and the company Cimcor and our product Cimtrack have in common is that we tend to focus on those foundational and core elements that help ensure the security of your organization. So for instance, here's a look at it from the perspective of the CIS controls framework. And the first section of it is the basic controls. Now, these are the controls that need to be done first because everything really builds on top of it. So Cimtrack squarely helps in terms of secure configurations with hardware and software, understanding exactly what changed. So we help with control number 5, but we also help to an extent with control number 2, inventory and control of software assets. LogRhythm squarely helps with control number 6, the maintenance and monitoring of analysis of audit logs, and LogRhythm can also help to an extent with control number 3. So you have 2 tools that are really helping with 4 out of the 6 basic controls for the CIS controls framework. Let me put it a different way. Let's look at, right now I'm showing you a chart from Gartner. This is their graphic regarding cloud workload protection. But this really applies to all types of infrastructures. But if you look at it, they have the most important foundational elements at the bottom, at the most critical elements at the bottom of this pyramid. And as the pyramid goes up to the peak, those are the less critical technologies. So you'll see, so if we drill down, we'll see what's here at the bottom. Well, log management and SIEMs, that's the piece that LogRhythm brings to the table. Some of the vulnerability management components, increased visibility is something else that LogRhythm brings to the table. And Cimcor, with our product Cimtrack, helps bring to the table items such as whitelisting, hardening, configuration management, change management, and also system integrity insurance. So what we've done by combining our tools and integrating is that we've really laid a strong foundation, several layers, according to this Gartner chart, a foundation for which to build the rest of your security stack. So let's talk a little bit more about this system integrity insurance. What is that? Well, you're all familiar with the word FIM. And that term's been around for quite a while. And basically FIM is the concept of monitoring files for changes, file integrity monitoring. But as an industry, we've evolved to a new concept called system integrity insurance. And that's not just monitoring files for changes, but it's a bigger concept. It's understanding when, say, database schemas change, or if new users are added to your Active Directory, or if business logic has changed, or if a network device configuration has been altered in some way. So it's or changes to your cloud configuration. It's understanding changes across a myriad of operating systems, applications, devices, and whether it's physical inventory, physical brick and mortar infrastructures or cloud. So that's part of it, of system integrity insurance. The other part about system integrity insurance is not understanding when something has changed and understanding its level of integrity, but also what are you going to do about it? What's the plan for rolling back some type of change or remediating that change? Are there any facilities to prevent a change from occurring, an unexpected change from occurring in the first place? What about digesting threat feeds? Can that somehow be used to ensure the integrity of your organization and your infrastructure? And then if something did happen, what now? How do we communicate that effectively to the security engineers so that they can get involved and mitigate the issue? So the way we look at system integrity insurance, it's addressing all of these, from real-time change detection to remediation to rollback, mitigation, and even ticketing type of workflow. So for us, we believe there are three core elements to creating this resilient organization, this resilient infrastructure. So the first pillar we think of is security. And this really, I'm gonna tell you something that really drives a lot of our thoughts. We're at this point right now where on average, it takes 206 days before an organization even realizes they've been breached. That's that MTTI, mean time to identify. We feel that 206 days is just too long. That's an unacceptable number. So what are the controls that can be put in place to help drive that number down to just mere seconds? And that's what we're focusing on from the security perspective. How do we do that real-time detection and analysis? How do we implement the ability to roll back or remediate? And how do we integrate to other tools such as LogRhythm so that we can provide that visibility? Because again, LogRhythm does a great job of providing that insight across your enterprise into what's happening. So that's the security side of things. The second pillar that's important to us is operations. Well, let me tell you the other part of the story. It took us 206 days to identify a breach as a general industry. From an operations side, then it takes us 73 days to contain it on average. Again, that's too high. What are the components that could be put in place to help drive that stat to mere seconds? You know, what can we do to provide continuous compliance? What can be done to create this change management workflow and to make sure that folks, security engineers, are receiving the right task at the right time? And how do we maintain an audit trail of all of that? Well, for us, all of that, security and operations, what weaves it all together is compliance. So that's the third main pillar, is providing a simple way to implement continuous compliance via a repeatable workflow and clear processes. And what's really important is to have a large compliance library as well. Now, this webinar is about CMMC, but we all know that we're all likely responsible for complying with multiple regulations and compliances. There's, if you're a hospital, you may have to comply with HIPAA and PCI and CMMC. So how do you provide continuous compliance across multiple compliances? It was also important to us to just make it simple, providing audit trails of all the changes and help you understand if you're getting better or worse in terms of where you stand in terms of your compliance and security posture. So again, I mentioned we try to look at many compliances. Here's just a subset, but if you look at Cimtrack alone, we help with NIST 853, we help address 26% of the items in 853 through providing additional evidence or enabling a process or helping from an auditing perspective for 26%. Or if you look at PCI DSS, 48%, or CMMC, 25%. Sarbanes-Oxley, 47%. So one tool can provide reporting and give you insight across multiple compliances. But let's drill down and let's look specifically at CMMC. Well, as Kyle mentioned, you have those 5 levels of CMMC. Most of the DIB, most of the defense industrial base will need to comply with CMMC level 1. And then the next most common would be level 3. And as Kyle mentioned, there'll be just a small subset responsible for maturity level 5. Now, for Cimtrack, we help at maturity level 5. We provide evidence, assistance, or guidance for up to 25% of those controls. And because the requirements aren't as much, if you look at CMMC, maturity level 1, we help with up to 35% of those 17 controls. Let's try to look at this in a different way. This chart shows all of the maturity levels, and what's in yellow, this chart shows all of the control categories, and everything in yellow are controls that we can help or assist with in some way. So that's a pretty impressive list there. But what happens when we combine LogRhythm and Cimtrack together? Wow, look at CMMC maturity level 5. That shoots up to 78% with the 2 tools together. And Kyle did a great job of showing you some of the main areas that LogRhythm can help and shore up in terms of CMMC. We work with our folks to create this combined list. At CMMC level 1, maturity level 1, we help with up to 88% of those controls in some way. And I think it's even easier to look at it this way. Again, all of those control categories, look at all that yellow. There's a lot of information and a lot of insight that we can, and a lot of evidence that the two tools together can bring to bear and make available to your organizations. So for us, the end result, and I'm not going to show you dashboards and parts of our tool, but for us, one of the important parts is the end result is having some type of report. A report showing where you stand. Here, we're going to show you for CMMC level 5. And we're going to show you the number of tests that were run, how many of those tests passed, how many of those tests failed, was anything waived. You know, we'll show you the actual control category associated with it. And then all the tests that were performed for those control categories. Many of them are CIS benchmarks or just the STIGs uses to support those. Now here's one, see this awareness and training? There are no tests for that because that's a human factor. But configuration management, that's something that obviously we nail because we're the best in integrity monitoring and integrity verification. And here are all the tests that are run and the status, whether it was good or bad, passed or failed, the description of the test, what we felt the rationale was for that test, remediation steps related to that test, and how it was actually assessed. And then we even show you, you know, what the actual value was on your system and what it was expected to be. So how do Cimtrack and LogRhythm specifically align? Well, as Kyle mentioned, the SIM accesses main repository of all information and events throughout your organization. It's that core repository and audit trail of what happened. Now, he also mentioned that because of that, you have to be careful about noise. Well, the interesting thing about Cimtrack is it's completely binary in nature. When it says that something has changed, it has changed. If it says that a new user was added to Active Directory, a new user was added to Active Directory, or a new user was granted administrative privileges to your Oracle database. These are real actionable items that are information that's provided to you from our tool Cimtrack and transmitted to the SIM. So even though alert fatigue might be something that companies are struggling with as they feed more and more information into their SIMs, by correlating events with information from Cimtrack, that lets you cut through the noise and really paint a picture of what's really important. What are the things you should actually be focused on? So that means we're providing you with relevant and actionable information whenever there's a drift in terms of integrity. It means we're providing you relevant and actionable information regarding when there's changes to your security posture. Say if your system was hardened yesterday and is not in a hardened state today. Providing, or where do you stand? Of those 17 controls for CMMC level 1, you're passing 6 of them. Now you're passing 5 according to our software. Tracking that is critical. And then providing, we also work great with LogRhythm because we can help provide that next piece. The SIM provides that informational intelligence. Cimtrack can help provide that last mile. What now? How do you roll back? How do you fix this? How do you remediate it? What's the mitigation path? So we're helping to detect all of those types of deviations across the board, whether it's related to compliance or system hardening or files or your cloud infrastructure. And we do all this using our patented technology that in many cases can detect changes in real time. Again, we're not okay with that 273 days to detect number that our industry is dealing with right now. We think it should be in seconds. And so we're really focusing on building a platform that allows you to accomplish that. Finally, when things happen, what now? There was an incident or there was a problem. How do we deal with that? Well, that's where it's important to have this workflow that we're providing that can integrate to other tools such as ServiceNow or BMC or Remedy via our own built-in ticketing system. So what we're essentially doing is connecting technology via our built-in ticketing system to people. So we're connecting those two entities through our tool as well. How is it deployed? It can be deployed. Our tool Cimtrack can be deployed on-premise or in the cloud or even in a hybrid environment. And the same applies for LogRhythm. On-premise or in the cloud or hybrid configurations are just fine. And when we're mashed together, when we're configured to work together, you benefit from system hardening and scanning to ensure systems are hardened. You're benefiting from CIS benchmarks and disastigs, a change management process or configuration management process, a workflow to support it all and to reconcile unexpected changes, the ability to digest whitelist, create your own blacklist, and then the ability to integrate to all these external ticketing systems or leverage the ticketing system that's built into our tool. And all of that information can be fed right into LogRhythm for analysis, reporting, and correlation analysis. And ultimately, if something needs to be done, LogRhythm can help coordinate the response. And that's another great integration point because that allows Cimtrack to take over at that point when a response is needed to provide advanced functionality such as the ability to roll back a system, portions of a system back to a previous state, or provide remediation advice in terms of if there was a compliance shift, say password hardening standards have changed in some way, or some other test. You can even use this connection between LogRhythm and Cimtrack to enable rules such as change prevention to stop changes on certain systems from occurring in the first place. So we think this is an incredibly valuable combination. Cimtrack is easy to use. Again, it covers multiple compliance mandates. You saw a subset, just a subset before on a few slides back. Integrates and can leverage and scan systems against CIS benchmarks and disastigs. And you saw a report that showed a mapping specific to CMMC down to each control and subcontrol and how you stand and the evidence related to that. And then just integrating to your existing ticketing systems or ITSM systems is very valuable because once you've identified drift or identified a problem, what now? How do you connect that to the people that have to deal with it? So quick wrap up, Cimtrack and LogRhythm together, well, they cover 80% of all the CMMC controls across all the levels in some way, whether it's providing assisting information, providing evidence, or enabling a process. And it's very easy to wrap both Cimtrack and LogRhythm into your workflow. And we believe that the integration of both is the foundation for providing continuous assurance, continuous compliance, continuous integrity, and continuous security. So that wraps up our presentation, and I will open the floor up for questions.
We do have some questions that have already come in. All right, the first question we have, let's see. This is specifically to LogRhythm, how many, well, and I think you covered it, Robert, so can you ask this question? How many of the CMMC practices can the LogRhythm offering address and or inform? You kind of covered that with your slide, Robert. And then, you know, as far as additional documentation, But Ken, you had an additional question for LogRhythm as far as them offering SOC and MDR services as well? And that is the question, Kyle.
Sure.
Great.
Yeah, I can take a first stab at that. So, regarding the first question about the CMMC practices, yeah, I really appreciate Robert's slide. I think to clarify, and Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, that demonstration of the coverage of those controls is really specific to, where does an end user get coverage of CMMC when they consider Cimtrack and LogRhythm SIM combined, the value of those two products together. And I think there was an earlier graphic with just Cimtrack. If you look at a just SIM, I don't have an exact number on the control practices. I think it's over roughly 75% of them. But as you saw on Robert's graphic, when you talk about both of those together, is where you start to see. And I don't know if you have the exact number, Robert. I think it's like over 90% coverage almost of those control practices. So the integration of those two is where you see obviously the best benefit, but you do get value from either using either of them independently. And to answer the other question, LogRhythm does offer professional services. If I could we'll probably get that name from you after Jacqueline, but I would probably direct them to our services team just to give them a more adequate answer of the exact services we could offer them.
Sounds good. There's another question that came out in regards to the SOC SIM requirement to achieve CMMC level 3 for small to medium business level. The question is really, is it a necessity, or do you feel these controls can be solved without it? And it's really just the question of, the question is really, is it a necessity, or do you feel these controls can be solved without it? And that came from a Mark. And Mark, I hope I'm clarifying it.
Well, I think that using a SIM to cover many of those controls is the simplest solution to it. I believe that you need, at a minimum, even if you aren't using a SIM, you need log management in place. The problem is that you can do something for the mere fact of just saying, I'm going to have a log. I have all the logs stored in some way, or you can say, I'm gathering all of this log information, and now I need to make decisions about it. And that's really the difference between log management solution and a SIM. Visibility, correlation analysis, and ability to, I'm really doing Kyle's pitch now.
You're doing a great job, Robert. Keep going.
To make actionable decisions based on that information.
Yeah, I would 100% concur. Just to add on, I don't think that it would certainly, is it an absolute requirement? Probably not. Could you jerry rig something that would pass the controls by their standards? We haven't seen many real audits occur yet, but you probably could. Would it be easy or prudent or cost effective? I mean, that is a great question. I would be of the opinion that probably not, that the value that it adds certainly makes up for it in sort of that correlation and analysis. But is it possible? Yeah, I would say that it's probably possible without.
Just probably a little painful.
Very much so. I would agree.
Another question came in here. This one is for Robert. As far as the product, would you describe the product as a platform for security or more for compliance?
We really focus on both equally. We try to put, because without security in place, you can't have any type of compliance, to be honest. So we've put a lot of effort into trying to weave both of those worlds together. To just make it simpler for the end user. That is one of our prime directives in the development of our software. So if you look at our history, we did start out really focused on the security side of things, helping to lock things down and help you understand change. And we evolved to add this compliance piece because we really look at the compliance component as a way of translating the security data into something that means something to humans. So think of the compliance part as our translation layer. Let's put this in terms of something that matters. I have all these security controls in place. How does this help me in terms of CMMC? Or what does this mean in terms of PCI DSS? So that's how we really look at our compliance component, as the Rosetta Stone between security and compliance mandates.
Okay, we have another one here, and this one is for you, Kyle. This is more about costs and the cost of implementing a SIM. It can be expensive. Do you have MSPs that focus on offering CMMC services? Really kind of going in that direction.
Yeah, so this is going to be akin, I think, to the last question about services offered. And absolutely, LogRhythm does partner with a number of MSSPs, and they're used because there are companies that want to use LogRhythm as a tool, and they may not have a full SOC to use that. So is it something that, do we have end customers that use an MSSP to support LogRhythm? Absolutely. In addition, like I said, we do have other professional services that are offered, but if that person wanted to reach out and give you their information, Jackie, I'd love to actually direct them to some of our services team, just to actually lay out specifically what kind of offerings that we could offer them if they are looking for something.
Excellent. We do have another one here, and this really might be for both you, Robert and Kyle. Do you have pre-tuned policies or pre-developed or pre-tuned policies specific to CMMC that really is just used out of the box?
For us, for Cimcor, yes. For us, you can basically set up the ranges of IPs that you would like to scan. We'll scan all of those systems and then take all the results of that scan and then translate it directly into a CMMC report based on the level of which you're interested in. So
yeah, go ahead. Finish your thought, Robert.
You can take it away, Kyle.
Yeah, I would just agree that LogRhythm is similar, and then actually the way that we communicate with each other only feeds that in sort of the coverage. But yes, there is out of the box content that is going to support your initiative. I always caveat, having been I have spent my professional background before going into sort of this development an engineer role in audit and compliance, is that when audit and compliance out of the box does have a certain connotation to it that you don't necessarily have to do anything to it. I do always caveat with, yes, with the appropriate, as Robert said, if you pointed at the right IPs, right? If you take the consideration to point out that you've considered the correct scope of things you're looking at for FCI and CUI, but in the what it's evaluating and how it's evaluating those things that you've pointed it at, configured directly, absolutely, yes, it supports those the control practices themselves or the test and evaluation, and can produce output for reporting on that.
Yep. Perfect.
Okay. Looks like we have another here. And I don't have any other pending questions except for this last one here. So if you've got some questions, let's get them asked so we can get them answered. This question is really as far as how quickly can LogRhythm and Cimtrack be implemented and operational? This isn't in terms of on-prem or even for a managed service environment. How quickly can this be implemented and really go into operations?
Wow. Why don't you start, Kyle, and then I'll jump in.
Sure. So as far as an exact operational, I don't know how many implementations we have right now of Cimtrack and LogRhythm going together. I know it's in its early phases, so an exact timeline of those both getting up to speed is a little uncertain to me. But LogRhythm, there is with every installation, a professional services team that does the installation, and I believe gets that up and running. It depends on the size of the organization and the services that you have, but as little as a few days to a week. But I'd obviously want to. That's a very large question and depends very much on the services that you get offered. So I would want to defer that one to possibly. It could be very quickly, or if you have a very large environment with a lot of services, it might take a little bit longer.
Right, and the same applies for us. The size of the environment is the most important variable in how you answer this question. But for most environments, for us, implementation is a matter of a few hours to a few days. And it's very easy to integrate the two products together because we just feed our data directly into LogRhythm.
And then I have another question here that just came in. Does Cimtrack support Microsoft 365? And it says from a previous discussion, it sounded like it did not provide the information required for CMMC.
Yes, right now we've added support to monitor Microsoft Azure cloud infrastructures, and but we have not extended that functionality yet to monitor Microsoft 365 data. So that is on our roadmap, but currently that is not available.
Okay, any other questions? Looks like we might actually finish at the top of the hour here. Give you guys a few minutes back of your day, right? Well, I really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and share some information here with you for any follow-up. You know, for those of you that had more specific questions, I'm going to forward that information on. Kyle, I'm going to provide all that information to you. You know, everyone that had questions. You know, as I said, we are going to be sending out the presentation along with a link to the recording. And really, thank you. This was the last in our series for our CMMC webinar series. The other 3 parts are available on demand. You can always access our resource library. All of the webinars are there along with additional information. If there are any additional questions, even after the end of this discussion, please feel free to contact any of us directly. And, you know, we want to thank you again for your time today, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.